Monogamy feels obvious. Two people meet, they commit to each other, they stay loyal. That's what a healthy relationship looks like, right? That's what most of us grow up to believe. And anything outside of that feels somehow wrong, as if something went wrong. But is it really so? And what if the structure itself isn't as simple as it looks? Welcome to Look Again, the channel where we do not tell you what is true, but where we question what you accept and assume to be true. To be fair, this idea of a monogamous relationship is obviously not random, it's everywhere. It's in the movies, they reinforce it, families is the base of it, right? Society organizes itself around it, or at least it would appear so. You meet someone, you build a life together, you stay together, and most of us don't really question that, not deeply anyway, because it feels stable, predictable, safe. But let's pause for a second. When we say a relationship is working, is healthy, what exactly are we measuring? Is it loyalty, consistency, the absence of betrayal, or something else we don't really define? Have you noticed how often relationships follow a pattern? At the beginning, there's intensity, attention, attraction, curiosity, but over time, something shifts, not dramatically, not at all at once, but gradually. The same person is there, maybe even the same commitment, but the experience is not the same. And what is interesting, we rarely stop to look at what exactly is changing. A question begins to form then. If the structure is stable, if both people are committed, why does the experience inside that structure often becomes complicated? Why do things like frustration, distance, or even secrecy appear so consistently? Not always, not in every case, but often enough to notice. And if this pattern appears repeatedly, it becomes worth examining more closely. Not to immediately conclude something is wrong, but to understand what might be happening underneath the surface of what looks stable on the outside. Because what we usually see as a relationship is only the visible layer. And the question is whether something else is forming underneath it that is not immediately visible from the beginning. Maybe it's not just about commitment. Maybe it's about what's happening underneath that commitment. For example, what if two people don't experience connection in the same way over time? Not emotionally, not physically, not even in terms of attention or desire. And so we come to our usual layers, and we have picked 3. There are many, and you can let us know which one would you like to explore, but we picked the following 3. Hypergamy versus polygamy. At the most basic level, men and women are not driven by the same underlying instinct. For women, attraction moves towards the best available option. It's about quality, not just any partner, but the one who represents the highest value in that moment, the strongest, the most capable, the most secure. But that standard can also shift over time, which means the evolution does not necessarily stop. For men, the drive is totally different. It is not centered about finding the single best option, but around access to more variety, more opportunities, more flexibility overall, more freedom. Not necessarily replacing one with another, but not being limited to one either. So from the start, one is, as mentioned, oriented towards quality and the other towards quantity. And both are placed inside a structure that demands exclusivity from both. And if desire does not naturally align with the structure it is placed inside, are the tensions that appear later a failure of the individuals or evidence of how human nature reacts within the confines of an artificial structure? The layer number 2 is emotion versus logic. Obviously, how each side experiences and processes the relationship itself is different. For women, the relationship is lived through emotion. Connection is felt, changes are noticed quickly, distance, tone, attention, all of it matters. When something shifts, it creates a need to respond, to address it, to express it, to act on it. For men, the response is very different. It's more contained, more logical, more focused on maintaining stability, not necessarily reacting to every emotional fluctuation, but trying to keep things steady, avoiding escalation. And this can actually create tension, because emotional expression can feel like escalation, and logical distance can feel like neglect. So the same situation creates two completely different experiences. One feels unheard, the other feels pressured. And if neither response is wrong on its own, what does it mean to place both inside a structure that demands they function as if they were the same? And this brings us to layer number 3. And this is the role formation within the relationship. Because over time, the dynamic of the roles doesn't stay neutral. It begins to resemble something that psychoanalysis has already named. For men, there can be an Oedipal pattern that re-emerges inside the relationship, not consciously, but in how he begins to relate to his partner. She's no longer only experienced as partner in tension or difference, but can start to be processed internally in a more familiar role, something closer to the mother image. So interactions begin to shift. He may become more indirect in conflict, more approval seeking in certain moments, or more dependent on emotional reassurance than he realizes. He might even start calling her how his dad used to call his mother. And for the woman, she will be gradually placed into a position where she is expected to respond to that, to reassure, to stabilize, to permit or approve, without either person explicitly deciding it. The relationship changes. The structure starts to resemble a son-mother dynamic instead of an equal partnership. But it doesn't move only in one direction. For the woman's side, a mirrored structure can appear. Jung described it as the Electra dynamic. The man begins to be unconsciously positioned into the role of the father, a source of safety, direction, stability, approval. She might even call him as she calls her own father. So instead of meeting him purely as an equal, she relates to him as if he holds authority over her emotional world, seeking reassurance, grounding, confirmation of worth, direction, and access to resources, so she can persist in the fantasy world of being his little princess. And in that positioning, he is no longer just a man in a relationship. He becomes something closer to a stabilizing parental reference point. So what emerges is not one-sided. It is a reciprocal role structure. Usually, one dynamic becomes dominant. The man may begin to drift toward a mother image projection onto the partner, relating to her in ways that seek reassurance, stability, and the need for permission. And in response to that structure, the woman will gradually find herself positioned into a maternal role within the relationship. At other times, the direction will go the other way. The woman may begin to relate to the man through a father image projection, seeking grounding, approval, direction, emotional certainty. And the man then becomes placed into that stabilizing paternal position. Both projections remain unconscious, both shape behavior and the relationship, and both reinforce the structure once it has formed. And underneath it, these patterns only reflect emotional processes that were never fully resolved, moments where discomfort was not fully faced directly, but instead managed through the relationship itself. So the relationship starts to carry more than connection. It becomes a space where unresolved emotional material is regulated, where avoidance is stabilized through the other person. And in that sense, what looks like a relationship on the surface can also function as a structure that protects both people from fully confronting what is really happening inside. And when that structure stabilizes, the original relationship begins to change form, not into equality, but into something closer to a family role projections being replayed inside an adult partnership. One becomes associated with stability, grounding, authority, the other with emotional response, reassurance, and so on. And from there, the dissatisfaction that appears doesn't always come from what is being done, but from the fact that both people are no longer relating to each other directly, but through the roles that have gradually replaced their original connection. And once that happens, the relationship is no longer just between two people in the present. It begins to carry something older into the present moment, something that was never consciously chosen, but continues to shape how both experience each other. And if that's the case, then maybe this isn't just about relationships. Maybe it's about how we try to organize human behavior in general. We take something that is inherently complex, that is fluid, and place it into fixed categories: healthy, unhealthy, successful, failed. We even do this in other areas of life. In the workplace, for example, we try to find the right person for the role, not because people are identical, but because the structure demands a match. But there's tension, because what happens when human nature is not designed to fit neatly into predefined roles? Because if a system assumes a right fit, then it also assumes that mismatch is the exception. But in relationships, we are not dealing with standardized components. We are dealing with emotion, instinct, change, and adaptation. So if we keep applying a single model to very different psychological realities, what happens over time? Do we recognize mismatch as part of the system itself, or as a failure of the individual? And if every situation is interpreted through the same lens, how do we notice when the experience underneath has already changed? So when we say monogamy is healthy, are we really looking at a structure that fits human nature? Or are we looking at a structure that assumes human nature can be made uniform? Because the more we treat relationships like roles to be filled, the more we assume that people can simply be placed into them correctly. But human behavior or nature doesn't work that way. Sometimes a person can be right on the paper, but still not fit the lived experience of the role. And if that's true, then the question is no longer just whether relationships work, but whether we are trying to fit something fluid into a structure that requires it to be fixed. And if that tension exists, what exactly are we calling healthy?